Good day, everyone. I am Evelyn Mamangon, and I am very happy to present to you tip number 3 of our Do the Right Thing tips series. In this series, I feature common errors of students in writing. So let's have a review first of the previous tip number 2, and that is to make sure that your pronoun and the antecedent match. In this example, the lesson about the continuous evolution of the species and their underlying functions in the universal exchange is a very long topic. Is a very long title for a topic. It is very interesting. So this is, of course, I just made it up. This topic, I just made it up. I do not know if there's really such a lesson. I made it very long because many students would get confused. They would get overwhelmed by the length of the subject, that they would think that it will be plural. But the subject is still singular, indicated by the word lesson. So it still needs a singular pronoun. Therefore, it is used in the next sentence. Okay, so hope that is a good reminder for you. So let's move on to our third tip. Tip number 3, and that is do not run on. What is a run-on sentence? A run-on sentence, it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas, you do not put the proper punctuation marks. Because there is no pause between the ideas in a run-on sentence, it is hard for a reader to read and understand it. Okay, I intentionally did the last 2 sentences to really show you how a run-on sentence looks like. So in the last 2 sentences are really examples of run-on sentences, and it is logical to call them run-on because instead of really stopping or pausing the flow of ideas, the writer goes on. That's why it's called run-on. The writer continues and does not stop. In this particular example, let us go back to the previous sentences that I showed you, the descriptions about the run-on sentence. This particular sentence is called comma splice. Why? There are 2 independent clauses here. The first one, it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas. That's the first independent clause. And the next independent clause, you do not put the proper punctuation marks. These are called independent clauses because there is a subject and a predicate, and the thought is complete. Let's say in the first example, the first independent clause, it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas. The subject is it, and the predicate is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas. And it has a complete thought because what is it? It is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas. What is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas? The answer is it. So for it to be an independent clause, there should be what? A subject and a predicate and a complete thought. Same with the next clause. You do not put the proper punctuation marks. The subject is you. The predicate is do not put the proper punctuation marks. And the idea is complete because it is clear who do not put the proper punctuation marks? You. And who are you? You do not put the proper punctuation marks. So the idea, I hope you get that idea. What makes an independent clause? So specifically, okay, the error is called comma splice because look at the next. Okay, because you only see, if you look at the previous example here, in this example, you only see what? A comma. And a comma is not enough. When you join two independent clauses, you need a coordinating conjunction to complete your sentence. Again, you commit this error called comma splice if you join two independent clauses with just a comma. A comma is not enough. You need coordinating conjunctions to complete your sentence. And what are these coordinating conjunctions? You remember your previous lesson, fanboys. Fanboy starts with what? Stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Okay? Comma is not enough. You need fanboys. Okay, so how are we going to correct the previous comma splice? So here, since we just need comma is not enough, we have to add fanboys. So the correct version will be, it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas, comma, and then insert but. You do not put the proper punctuation marks. Or you may also say, it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas, comma, and you do not put the proper punctuation marks. Okay? So, there's another way, aside from using comma and then fanboys, you can also use semicolon. But if you will use semicolon, you have to get rid of the fanboys. Again, if you're going to use semicolon, you have to remove fanboys. Let me show this to you. Okay, so it is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas, semicolon. You do not put the proper punctuation marks. So again, if you will be connecting two independent clauses with a semicolon, you no longer need fanboys. Semicolon will do. Okay? Or there's still another way. You simply need to separate these two ideas by a period. Okay? It is a sentence where you put a lot of ideas, period. You do not put the proper punctuation marks. This by far is the easiest, but of course I do not encourage you to do this every time unless you want your paragraphs to be monotonous. I gave you several options so that you can choose from them and not just be contented with using simple sentences in relaying your thoughts in a paragraph. Okay, this is the easiest, but use this sparingly. Okay, let's have the second run-on sentence. Because there is no pause between the ideas in a run-on sentence, it is hard for a reader to read and understand. In this particular example, this run-on sentence has one independent clause and one dependent clause. What is a dependent clause? A dependent clause has a subject and a predicate, but the idea or the thought is not complete. Okay, let's try. Because there is no pause between the ideas in a run-on sentence, that's where your dependent clause ends. What is the subject? A run-on sentence. And what is the predicate? Because there is no pause between the ideas. Or there is no pause between the ideas. It becomes a dependent clause because of the subordinate conjunction because. Okay, it is not a dependent clause. It is not an independent clause because it started with the word because. That this word makes this clause dependent. Now let's move to the independent clause. It is hard for a reader to read and understand. It is the subject, and it's hard for a reader to read and understand. That is the predicate, and it has a complete thought. What is hard for the reader to read and understand? It. And what is it? Is hard for a reader to read and understand. Okay, this is a run-on because you connected a dependent clause and an independent clause without proper punctuation marks. So how are we going to correct this? Let's have version number 1. If you started a sentence with a dependent clause, you need a comma in between. Okay, so so let's read. Because there is no pause between the ideas in a run-on sentence, that is you started your sentence with a dependent clause. You just have to insert a comma to separate these two clauses. Okay, this also makes the reader to read because the reader can stop and breathe, unlike the previous one. Because there is no pause between the ideas in a run-on sentence, it is hard for a reader to read and understand. But if there is a comma, that is an indication for the reader to stop or to pause. Okay, so what if you change the structure? That is, you put the dependent clause at the end of your sentence. If you do that, you don't need to put a comma. So let's read. Let me read for you. It is hard for a reader to read and understand because there is no pause in between the ideas in a run-on sentence. Again, you will not need a comma if you put the dependent clause at the end of your sentence. Okay, I hope that's clear. So let's have this example from the reflection about the tip number 2 that I asked my students to read. This is one of the reflections that I received. I would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do, but understanding it was easy. As I have mentioned in my previous tips, if there will be other issues in this sentence aside from the topic at hand, I will not comment on them about them. I will just focus on tip number 3 so as not to overwhelm you with a lot of info. So how are we going to correct this? So first, you need to identify whether it's a combination of 2 independent clauses or a combination of 1 dependent clause and 1 independent clause. So let us try. So I would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do. That is 1 clause, and then understanding it was easy. That is another clause. And you see the word but. So fanboys, one of the fanboys. Let's have the first clause first. I would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do. There's a subject I, and the predicate would be would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do. So who is I? Would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do. And who would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do? I. So we can say from that it has a subject and a predicate and a complete thought. Okay, let's move to the next clause. Understanding it was easy. What's the subject? It. And what's the predicate? Understanding was easy. What is it? Understanding was easy. And then what was it? Understanding was easy. And then what was easy? Understanding it. So we have a complete thought. We have a subject and a predicate. So in this case, we have what? 1 independent clause plus another independent clause. And we also already have the word but. So we just need what? We just need the comma to correct this sentence. So I would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do, comma, and then but understanding it was easy. So I hope that's very easy. So correct version number 2. Since we have two independent clauses, we can also use semicolon, but we need to remove the but. I would not say that the writing tip number 2 is easy to do, comma, semicolon. Understanding it was easy. Go. Or version number 3, we can just separate these two clauses by a period. I would not say that writing tip number 2 is easy to do, period. Understanding it was easy. Okay, this is just one of the options. Again, I would like to clarify, this is just one of the options. Do not always choose the easy way of correcting this because you'll end up with a very dull paragraph. So that's it. Our do the right thing tip number 3, do not run on. I hope I made that easy for you to understand. This is Mom Eve. Have a nice day.